Gentlemen, forgive me, I missed part of this hearing, so we may be plowing a little bit of old ground here. Secretary Barr, in your testimony, you speak about the events leading up to conservatorship, and I read your testimony. I didn't hear it. Assuming that it was the same testimony, I didn't see any mention of Fannie and Freddie's affordable housing goals, which, as you well know, the low and moderate income housing goals ratcheted up from 2,042% to 56% in 08, underserved areas from 24% in 2000 to 39% in 08, special affordable from 14% in 2000 to 27% in 08. We've had testimony before in this committee about Fannie and Freddie having to take on lower quality of loans that were connected to these affordable housing goals. Again, I saw no mention in your testimony. Should I conclude that you believe there is no nexus?
Mr. Hensarling, I think that primarily if you look at what happened in the lead up to the financial crisis and the conservatorship, primarily what happened was that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were chasing the private market. The private market in the boom went out and did, frankly—
I understand that, Mr. Secretary, but do you believe there is a nexus or not a nexus?
I think primarily the cause of the conservatorship and the cause of the failure of the two GSEs is fundamentally driven by profit motive and a desire to regain market share.
Does that mean you see some nexus, but not a significant nexus?
I think that the argument with respect to the goals, if they contributed, it was rather minor in relation to those two other factors, which is why I would not put it at the top of the set of problems. I should say going forward that I think that if Congress is considering affordability going forward, that it ought to have a clear delineation between that objective and other objectives in the housing finance system.
Well, throughout, see the chairman of the full committee is here. Throughout most of his career, he encouraged Fannie and Freddie to get more deeply involved in affordable housing, encouraged them to do more in affordable housing. On December 11th, Chairman Frank went to the House floor and said, quote, in 2004, President Bush, and yes, the affordable goals came in 1992, President Bush raised them from 42 to 54% over my objection. I thought it was imprudent and said so at the time. You don't want to take the opportunity and try to blame President Bush for one more problem here?
Sir, I don't think it really helps to blame one or another party or member with respect to any activity. I think what we want to do is look at the basic problems in the housing finance system. We had a race to the bottom in mortgage standards. We had a lack of uniform level playing field in the system. We had a system in which there was a implicit government backing for this GSEs.
Okay, we'll move on
to
the
private sector benefit and the public sector take the losses. I don't think
Mr. Secretary, we'll move on to a new question then. In your testimony, you list 4 objectives and goals for housing finance and reform, I believe on page 4 and 5 of your testimony. I did not see any mention whatsoever of taxpayer protection. As you well know, we already have $150 billion of taxpayer loss in Fannie and Freddie. We have, as you well know, taxpayers on the hook, the Fed, their MBS, over $1 trillion. I assume that was not an accident, that you did not consider, the administration did not consider taxpayer protection among the lead objectives and goals for housing finance reform.
I think taxpayer protection is absolutely critical, and that's why I talked about not having private gains and public losses. Perhaps the colloquialism did not translate effectively, but it is absolutely designed to protect the taxpayers. I don't think we can have a system in the future in which we have these private gains that are subsidized by the taxpayer, which the taxpayer is on the hook for, in which shareholders of private entities get the upside and taxpayers get the downside.
I think you mentioned I think you've mentioned in your testimony that part of the lack of desire to achieve reform today is, I believe you testified, that most of the losses have resulted from the underwritings of 05, 06, 07. But isn't it true that the loans that are being underwritten today, albeit with a new underwriting standard, one, we have a limited track record as opposed to the longer track record. Also, do we know how these loans would perform if they became underwater? And isn't the bottom line the taxpayer is still on the hook?
With respect to the losses that are being incurred today, there is a shortened time period. You're absolutely correct. On an age-adjusted basis, those loans are performing significantly better than they would on an age-adjusted basis to the old book of loans. So we do have an apples-to-apples comparison in the conservators' report from August. With respect to reform, we're strongly in favor of reform. I do believe that Congress took the important first step in passing HERA in 2008. The important second step of placing these entities into conservatorship, the important third step of passing the Dodd-Frank Act, which fundamentally transforms the regulation of the mortgage market, creates a level playing field, has ability pay requirements, has risk retention with respect to risky mortgages, has a whole set of reforms that are designed to prevent the market from blowing up the way it did in the past. And now we need to take the last step in that process, which is the housing finance sets of reform that I think the Congress should take up in this coming year.
The gentleman's time has expired. We'll now hear from the gentleman from California, Mr. Baca, for 5 minutes.